Discernment of spirits. It is indispensable, both for the direction of souls and for the study of extraordinary mystical phenomena, to be able to distinguish between the various spirits or impulses under which individual persons act or are acted upon. Unless one is able to determine whether or not a given person is acting under the Spirit of God, the spirit of darkness or the aberration of his own illusions will be practically impossible to avoid error and even tragic mistakes. The spirit of an individual refers to his internal inclination or propensity for good or evil, and it manifests itself with such regularity that it must be considered as a personal trait. Thus, if a person has the propensity to prayer, he is said to possess the spirit of prayer. If he has a tendency to arguments and altercations, he is said to possess a spirit of contradiction, etc. Understood in this sense, the spirit of a person is usually the result of both temperament and character. But it is also impossible for an individual to come under the influence of a spirit which is extrinsic to his personality from God or the devil, and for that reason it is the function of the discernment of spirits to judge whether an act or repetition of act flows from the spirit to the individual, the Spirit of God, or the diabolical spirit. There are two types of discernment of spirit, acquired and infused. Acquired discernment of spirits is a special art which is complementary to ordinary spiritual phenomena and can be cultivated by all who use the proper means. Infused discernment of spirits is a charismatic gift, or gratia gratis data, which is granted by God to certain individuals. We shall discuss infused discernment of spirits in its proper place under the gratiae gratis datae. For the time being, we merely state that the charismatic gift of discernment is infallible, because it is the result of an interior movement or inspiration received from the Holy Ghost, who cannot err. But it is extremely rare, and not even all the saints possessed it. Acquired discernment, on the other hand, is not infallible, and it presents many great difficulties, although it is absolutely necessary for a good spiritual director. It stands to reason that if a director is ignorant of the various spirits that may be the cause of the acts and movements of the soul, if he is unable to decide the particular spirit that motivates a given soul, he will be unable to determine which movements should be suppressed and which should be fostered and developed. St. John of the Cross and Father Scaramelli place great stress on the importance of discernment, pointing out that the possibility of error and tragic misguidance of souls is greatly augmented when acquired discernment is lacking, and that the priest who presumes to take charge of the direction of souls without such knowledge is guilty of temerity. It is, therefore, important to examine carefully the various means to be used in order to acquire the art of discernment of spirits. 1. Prayer. This is the most important and fundamental means. Although we are speaking of an acquired art, personal effort would avail nothing without the special assistance of the Holy Spirit through the virtue of prudence and the gift of counsel. Hence, it is not only a question of the constant practice of prayer, but the particular petition by which the director requests of God the prudence necessary for the direction of souls in general and the light to be able to discern the will of God for some particular soul at a given time. It does not suffice to possess a theoretical knowledge of the spiritual life and the ways to perfection. One needs, in addition, to know the practical and concrete applications of these principles in particular cases. It is certain that God will answer these prayers with special graces which he gives to all rightly disposed souls, so that they may fulfill their duty. 2. Study. The spiritual director likewise needs a vast amount of knowledge which is acquired through faithful study. He should be familiar with the general principles of spiritual theology, as contained in sacred scripture, speculative theology, the masters of the spiritual life, and the lives of the outstanding saints. He should be especially careful not to restrict himself to a particular school or method of spirituality, for while it is true that the individual soul will necessarily follow a particular path or way, the spiritual director must rise above this exclusive spirit and possess a broad and sympathetic understanding of the variety of schools and methods of the spiritual life. St. John of the Cross speaks with unusual severity when discussing those spiritual directors who know only one path to perfection and to strive to force all the souls under their direction to follow the same path. 3. Personal experience. Self-knowledge is a basic requirement for any kind of direction of others. While it is true that each person has his unique traits and characteristics, there is also a common pattern which is possessed by all, and, unless one understands himself, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to understand others. Under this same heading we may include that sympathy or rapport which flows from the understanding of one's own virtues and defects and the ability to place oneself in the position and circumstances in which others find themselves. According to the statement of St. Paul, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Moreover, if the spiritual director himself is not striving for greater perfection, and has not attained some degree of virtue and self-mastery, it is not likely that he will be able to direct others or even understand their condition, especially when they enter upon the higher stages of the spiritual life. In this sense, holiness of life is a most desirable trait in a spiritual director, and it is of inestimable value in acquiring the art of discernment of spirits. 4. Removal of obstacles. Under this heading, we may place any of the defective qualities which are an impediment to the understanding and direction of souls. One of the greatest obstacles is the spirit of self-sufficiency, which prevents the director from seeking the advice of those who are more learned or more experienced than himself. God refuses his graces to those who are proud and grants them to the humble. Secondly, the director must avoid at all costs an excessive attachment to the one he is directing, for this attachment will cloud his judgment and cause him to be too sympathetic. He must strive to be as objective as possible and to maintain a strict sense of reserve in regard to his own person, and a cautious vigilance as regards the one being directed. He will avoid the inclination to judge according to purely human standards, and will be guided at all times by supernatural prudence. He will never be precipitous in his decisions, but will subject them to mature reflection without excessive cavilling. As regards the diverse spirits, St. Bernard enumerates 6: divine, angelic, diabolical, carnal, mundane, and human. All these, however, can be summarized under 3 headings: the divine spirit, the human spirit, and the spirit of the devil. God always inclines us to the good, working either directly or through secondary causes. The devil always inclines us to evil, working by his own power or through the allurements of the things of the world. The human spirit may be inclined to good or to evil, depending on whether the individual follows right reason or his own concupiscence. Due to the basic indifference of many purely natural inclinations, it is evident that they may be utilized for good and for evil, and that, while grace does not destroy nature but perfects and supernaturalizes it, the devil avails himself of human weakness and the effects of original sin to further his evil aims. Moreover, it may happen that in one and the same inclination or action the various spirits are intermingled, thus making it more difficult to discern which spirit has the predominance at a given time. It is evident that the Spirit of God and the spirit of the devil cannot be operating at one and the same time, since they tend to opposite goals. But God can direct or intensify a naturally good inclination, or the devil may exercise his power to divert those inclinations to evil. Even when it is evident that the divine spirit predominates in a given action, therefore, it does not follow that the antecedent or consequent movements and inclinations are likewise divine and supernatural. It frequently happens that purely human and natural movements introduce themselves, conspicuous, consciously or unconsciously, and cause the action to lose some of its supernatural purity. This is one of the factors which makes it almost impossible for the director or theologian to discern clearly the divine element in extraordinary mystical phenomena. Moreover, it is not at all unusual in the lives of mystics that their mystical and truly supernatural operations are interrupted by purely natural activities, or that, with God's permission, a diabolical influence is introduced. It is not easy to determine when the action of God terminates, when the natural or diabolical movement begins. If the director is familiar with the sign of the various spirits, however, he will have sufficient grounds for making a prudent judgment in each case. It will not always be a situation in which one spirit is operating exclusively, but even if there is a mixture of several spirits, one or another will always predominate. The following characteristics are general signs of the various spirits. When we treat of the mystical phenomena in particular, we shall have occasion to speak of some of these characteristics in greater detail. 1. Truth. God is truth and cannot inspire anything but truth in a soul. If a person believed to be inspired by God, therefore remains opinions which are manifestly against the revealed truth, the infallible teaching of the Church, or proven theology or philosophy or science, it must be concluded that the individual is deluded by the devil or is the victim of his own imagination or faulty reasoning. 2. Gravity. God is never the cause of things that are useless, futile, frivolous, or impertinent. When his spirit moves the soul, it is always for something serious and beneficial. 3. Enlightenment. Although one may not always understand the meaning of an inspiration from God, the effect of any divine movement or impulse is always enlightenment and certitude rather than darkness and confusion. This is true both as regards the effects on the individual who receives the inspiration and its effect on others. 4. Docility. Souls that are moved by the Spirit of God recognize their own ignorance and weakness with all the humility, accept cheerfully the advice and counsel of their directors or others who have authority over them. This spirit of obedience, docility, and submission is one of the clearest signs that a particular inspiration or movement is from God. This is especially true in the case of the educated, who have a greater tendency to be attached to their own opinions. 5. Discretion. The Spirit of God makes the soul discreet, judicious, prudent, and thoughtful in all its actions. There is nothing of precipitation, lightness, exaggeration, or impetuosity. All is well balanced, edifying, serious, and full of calmness and peace. 6. Humility. This is one of the most certain signs of the Spirit of God. The Holy Spirit always fills the soul with sentiments of humility and self-effacement. The more lofty the communication from on high, the more profoundly the soul inclines to the abyss of its own nothingness. Behold the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to thy word.
7. Peace. St. Paul speaks frequently of the peace that comes from God. Romans 15:33 and Philippians 4:9. And Jesus mentions peace as one of the manifestations of his Spirit. It is a quality which always accompanies communications from God, and when they are received, especially in prayer, the soul experiences profound and stable serenity in the depths of spirit. 8. Confidence in God. This is a counterpart and necessary consequence of true humility. Recognizing that of itself it can do nothing, as St. Paul says, the soul throws itself on the power and mercy of God with a childlike trust. 9. Flexibility of will. This sign consists primarily in a certain promptness of will to subject itself to the inspirations and invitations of God. Secondarily, it consists in a facility in following the advice and counsel of others, especially if they are superiors, confessors, or spiritual directors. It is opposed to the rigid and unyielding will, which is characteristic of those who are filled with self-love. 10. Purity of intention. The soul seeks only the glory of God in all that it does and the perfect fulfillment of the will of God, without human interest or motivation out of love. 11. Patience in suffering. Suffering is frequently the best touchstone for revealing the true worth of an individual. No matter what the source of the suffering or whether it is justly received or not, the soul bears it with a patience and equanimity and uses it as a means of further perfection. But this sign is not to be confused with the stoicism and insensitivity of those who are cold and phlegmatic by nature. 12. Self-abnegation. The words of Christ himself are sufficient evidence that this is a sign of the Spirit of God. If anyone will come after me, let him take up his cross and follow me. Matthew 16:24. 13. Simplicity. Together with veracity and sincerity, this characteristic is never lacking in those who are motivated by the Spirit of God. Any duplicity, arrogance, hypocrisy, or vanity must be attributed rather to the spirit of the devil, the father of lies. 14. Liberty of spirit. First of all, there is no attachment to any created thing, and not even to the gifts received from God. Secondly, all is accepted from the hands of God with gratitude and humility, whether it be a question of consolation or trial. Thirdly, while all duties and spiritual exercises are performed with promptness and punctuality, the soul is ready to leave even the most consoling and profitable exercise as soon as the charity of God's call it elsewhere. Liberty of spirit enables the soul to live in a state of constant joy and eagerness for the things of God. 15. Desire to imitate Christ. St. Paul says that it is impossible to have the Spirit of God without having the Spirit of Christ. Romans 8:9. For that reason, St. John of the Cross states that the soul which aspires to perfection must have an desire to imitate Christ in all things by conforming its life as much as possible to his. 16. Disinterested love. We mean by this kind of love all the characteristics which St. Paul attributes to true charity. 1 Corinthians 13:4-7. St. Augustine said of this type of love, Love with the love of charity, and do what you will. You will not sin. Whatever proceeds from interior charity cannot be but good. The devil may disguise himself as an angel of light, and inspire actions which at the beginning are good, in order thus to conceal his true motives and goals. For that reason, the director of souls must proceed with great caution, remembering that what is begun as good may become evil if deviations are not corrected. Even the most amazing mystical phenomena are no proof of themselves that the Spirit of God is at work in the soul. It is necessary to judge from the fruits that are produced rather than from the phenomenon in question. Since the signs of the spirit of the devil will be directly opposed to signs of the Spirit of God, we shall merely enumerate these manifestations so that the director will have at hand a steady reference. 1. Spirit of falsity. Sometimes lies are covered and concealed by truths, so that they will be more readily be accepted. 2. Morbid curiosity. Love of novelty and attachment to useless details which kill true devotion and solid piety. 3. Confusion, anxiety, and darkness of spirit. 4. Obstinacy. Stubbornness is one of the surest signs of a diabolical spirit. Constant indiscretion. Whatever goes against the duties of one's state of life, even if it be a question of exercises of piety, is a result of self-will or the spirit of the devil. The same is true of the persons who habitually go to extremes, for example in matters of penance or activity. 6. The spirit of pride and vanity. 7. Restlessness and unnecessary anxiety. 8. False humility. Usually this is merely a disguise of self-love and pride. 9. Despair, lack of confidence, and discouragement. 10. Presumption, vain security, and unfounded optimism. 11. Disobedience and hardness of heart. 12. Selfish motives, such as self-complacency, vanity, desire to be esteemed. 13. Impatience and suffering and stubborn resentment. Rebellion of the passions or the violent inclinations to evil. 15. Hypocrisy, duplicity, and simulation. 6. Attachment to created things and sensible consolations. 17. Neglect of the imitation of Christ. Feigned charity, fanatical zeal, and scrupulous observance of the law. Many of the extreme reformers and defenders of the letter of the law fall under this category. Once a spiritual director is assured that a person is under the influence of a diabolical spirit, he should concentrate his effort on the following. 1. Make the individual realize that he is a toy of the devil, and that he must take arms against the enemy. 2.
encourage the individual to pray earnestly to God for the grace to overcome the assaults of the devil. 3. Advise the person to act quickly and with due disdain of the devil as soon as his influence is exercised, trying to perform the contrary acts to which is suggested or felt. These have been clearly enumerated by Thomas à Kempis in The Imitation of Christ, Book 3, Chapter 54. His words should be pondered carefully, for he explains in a masterly fashion the struggles between grace and the human spirit, wounded by sin and inclined to his own interests and comforts. The human spirit is always inclined to its own satisfaction. It is a friend of pleasure and an enemy of suffering of any kind. It readily inclines to anything that is compatible with its own temperament, its personal tastes and caprices, or the satisfaction of self-love. It will not hear of humiliations, penance, renunciation, or mortification. If any director or confessor goes against its own inclinations, he is immediately branded as inept and incompetent. It seeks success, honors, and applause and pastimes. It is always a great promoter of anything that will arouse admiration or notoriety. In a word, the human spirit neither understands nor cares for anything except its own egoism. It is sometimes difficult in practice to judge whether given manifestations proceed from the devil or from the purely human and egoistic spirit, but it is always relatively easy to distinguish between these two and the Spirit of God. It will be possible in most cases, therefore, to determine that a given spirit could not possibly be from God, and that it must be combated, even if one is not sure whether it in fact is the devil or the human ego. The following contrasts may serve as a general rule for distinguishing between the diabolical and the human spirit. Natural impulses and inclinations are spontaneous. They can usually be traced back to some natural cause or are spontaneous. They can usually be traced back to some natural cause or disposition. The simulation of the senses act upon the interior powers, and they often persist in spite of prayers. The diabolical impulse or suggestion, on the other hand, is usually violent and difficult to prevent. It arises unexpectedly or with the slightest provocation. A mental suggestion excites the senses and disappears as a rule with prayer. Self-denial and rectitude of intention are excellent remedies against the spirit of egoism. Father Scaramelli dedicates an interesting chapter to what he calls the effect of doubtful or uncertain spirits, meaning that these effects are not to be taken as conclusive manifestation of a particular spirit, but that they may be the result of any one of the three. In this respect, the spiritual director and confessor will do well to keep in mind the admonition of Pope Benedict XIV when writing on the beatification and canonization of the servants of God. If there is a possible natural or diabolical explanation for a given phenomena, it cannot be presumed that this
is supernatural in origin. The following are the principal doubtful cases listed by Father Scarabelli. 1. To aspire to some other state in life after having made a prudent and deliberate selection. 2. To be attracted to rare phenomena or to singular exercises which are not proper to one's state in life. When God desires such things, he will give unmistakable proof of his will. The test is obedience and humility. 3. To seek the extraordinary in the practice of virtues, such as the holy foolishness of some of the saints who acted under an impulse from the Holy Ghost. 4. An inclination to practice extreme corporal penances. God has demanded them from some souls, but this practice is not in the working of the ordinary providence. 5. A taste for sensible consolations in the practice of prayer or the exercise of the virtues. The desire for continual spiritual consolations is even more doubtful, since the Spirit of God breathes where and when he wills. 6. The gift of tears, or the strong inclination to concentrate on the sorrowful and penitential aspects of religion. 7. The exclusive devotion to some particular mystery or pious exercise, which easily leads to a distortion of orthodox theology. 8. Great extraordinary favors such as revelations, visions, stigmata, when they occur in a person of little sanctity. Although the extraordinary phenomena in gratia gratis date do not necessarily presuppose sanctity or even the state of grace, God does not ordinarily grant these gifts except to his servants and friends. By way of conclusion, we again warn directors and confessors to proceed with great caution in making judgments in those matters involved in the discernment of spirits. It is extremely easy to err. In the case of extraordinary phenomena, it should be noted that, as a rule, when these things proceed from God, the soul first experiences great fear and humility, then peace and consolation. If they come from the devil, they usually begin with feelings of sensible consolation and satisfaction, but later, because they cause confusion, anxiety, and restlessness. Lastly, in regard to the rather frequent inclination which some persons experience to change their state in life, and usually to go to a higher and stricter form of life, the director will bear in mind that it is quite possible that such a desire actually proceeds from God, but without God's wanting the person actually to change his state in life. For example, a priest who is actively engaged in the apostolate may experience a strong desire to spend more time in prayer and solitude. In trying to understand the reason for this strong inclination, he may erroneously judge that it is God's will that he enter the Carthusians or the Trappists. Such is not necessarily the case, however, for it may well be that the only thing that God is asking of the priest is that he be less involved in the whirlpool of activity, and that he dedicate more time each day to prayer and recollection. As the final word on this common problem, we would state the following as a general rule for the solution of such cases. If the individual was prayerfully and seriously selected, the state of life in which he is must present a serious positive cause for changing his life. Otherwise, the will of God for him is the state of life in which he is. Another practical test is to see whether the individual is performing the duty of his present state of life with all infidelity. If not, he should not even think of changing to another state. 2. Causes of mystical phenomena. It is a basic principle in philosophy and science that we do not possess truly scientific knowledge of any fact or phenomena unless we know the causes. Unless we go beyond the field of particulars, we cannot have scientific knowledge. Now, the extraordinary mystical phenomena can be attributed to one of the three causes: natural, supernatural, or preternatural. There is no cause possible Now, the extraordinary mystical phenomena can be attributed to one of three causes: natural, supernatural, and preternational. There is no other possible origin for any extraordinary phenomena, because these three causes embrace all the possible explanations. If the given phenomena proceeds from God, it is supernatural in origin. If it proceeds from the devil, it is produced by a preternatural cause. If it is the result of a psychosomatic condition in the patient or some external physical power, it is classified under a natural cause. It is necessary, therefore, to investigate these three types of causality before we treat of the extraordinary mystical phenomena in particular. First, however, it will be helpful to clarify these three notions: natural, supernatural, and preternatural. 1. Natural. The word nature may be used in various senses. 1. To designate the essence of a concrete or particular thing, individual sense. To signify all the things in the visible created universe, collective sense. 3. To specify the essence of a thing as the radical principle in all its actions and passions, dynamic sense. As we use the word, it may have any one of the foregoing meanings, but especially the second and third. According to natural causes, will include the following elements: that which constitutes the essence of a visible created thing, the power or energies which naturally emanate from the essence of the concrete thing, including occult natural powers, whatever the created essence can produce by its own powers, the various effect which one agent can produce on another, whatever a concrete created individual thing requires the full development and its perfection in the natural order. 2. Supernatural. In general, the supernatural signifies which transcends the natural way in any of the accepted meanings of nature and natural. Thus, the supernatural transcends the essence of the individual created being,
All the laws of nature taken collectively, and the particular powers of an individual being as well. The supernatural can never be an exigency of the natural, but it can perfect the natural and complement it if gratuitously granted to God. In other words, the supernatural does not contradict or destroy the natural, but the natural has what the philosophers call an obediential potency, or non-repugnance as regards the supernatural. The supernatural is exactly what its name indicates, above the natural. It should never be understood as contra naturam. Hence, the supernatural is never a matter of violence, since God works in creatures according to the nature which he implanted in them, according to that ontological necessity of creatures to obey their Creator. Neither should the supernatural be confused with the free and artificial or the fortuitous. While it is true that the latter differ from the natural in the sense that they are not necessitated to one thing, they are nevertheless contained within the order of natural causality, and therefore are essentially distinct from the supernatural. The basic division of the supernatural is that of absolutely supernatural and relatively supernatural, and the former is again divided into the substantially relative. Substantially supernatural and the modally supernatural. Modally supernatural. The absolutely supernatural, simpliciter, signifies that which surpasses the power of any creature that does or could exist. The relatively natural, secundum quid, is that which surpasses human power, could well be connatural to an angel, and yet it would be supernatural in relation to the human being. This sense of the supernatural also includes the preternatural, as we see. The division of the supernatural into substantial, quoad substantiam, and modal, quod modum, was established by the theologians to explain the distinction between the supernaturally of miracles and the supernaturally supernatural substance only. Supernatural substance only. It may apply to that which is substantial and uncreated, such as the Trinity, or to that which accidental and created, such as grace, rather refer to that which is essentially supernatural, in the sense that it exceeds the causality and the essence of every being that is or could be divided. It refers either to the divine nature in itself or to a participation in the divine nature precisely as divine. Preternatural. Theologians generally refer to the preternatural as the supernatural secundum quid, or the relatively supernatural. It is outside the visible natural order, but it does not transcend the natural order absolutely or simpliciter.
To put it another way, it transcends the powers of given creature, but not the power of all creation, as does the absolute supernatural. Consequently, there is a great difference between the truly supernatural and the preternatural, and it would be better for reasons of clarity not to use the expression relatively supernatural when speaking, for example, of diabolical influence. Moreover, one must be careful not to confuse the preternatural with the supernatural quoad modum, even though they are both intuitively natural. The moded the mode or manner in which an effect is produced in the case of the supernatural quoad modum is something which surpasses the powers of all creatures that do or could exist. For this reason, the supernatural quoad modum is placed as a division for the absolutely supernatural. Hence, the supernatural quoad modum is always a true miracle, whereas the preternatural phenomenon, although it may surpass the powers of a human being, is nevertheless within the power of an angel or a devil. It does not surpass the entire order of creation. On the other hand, do we not refer to telepathy, extrasensory perception, or the phenomena of spiritualism as preternatural, but as paranormal, since these phenomena lie within the visible natural order? It should be evident that the foregoing distinctions are of great importance when attempting to diagnose the cause of a given extraordinary phenomenon. Many unusual events may seem at first glance to be truly mystical and supernatural phenomena because they are obviously surpass the powers of human beings, but on a closer examination they prove to be the result of diabolical powers, and are not, therefore, truly supernatural at all. We shall use the term preternatural to refer to diabolical interventions in the visible universe, and we shall restrict the word natural to designate only those phenomena which proceed from the ordinary laws of the universe in the visible order.